Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to show you how to set up, sharpen and use a number 12.5 scraper plane. Hope you enjoy. So what is the number 12.5 scraper plane? Well, as you can see here, it's got this T-handle across the top to allow you to hold and get your fingers in here. It has this threaded bit here which allows you to adjust the angle of this head. It's a completely fluid head, so you can adjust it right down and right up, so from 90 degrees dead bolt upright almost right down flat. So you've got this massive wide ranging angle that you can adjust for the burr to actually take its shaving, and that does give it a little more flexibility and allow it to work doing various different jobs. Now I wanted to tackle why this 12.5 is sometimes called a veneer plane. Well, this is talking maybe traditionally hand cut veneer, and also when you come to attach veneer. So the scraper could work to smooth the back of your veneer out. That's no problem. If you needed to smooth your veneer, this would do the job. But these also came available with what's called a toothing blade, which has a series of ridges on the back of the blade, which means that the edge of the scraper is just a series of teeth, like a fork almost. And the whole idea was that was used to hash a crisscross diamond pattern on the back of your veneer and on your substrate, so when you glued it down with hide glue, it had more surface area to allow it to actually stick. And so that's why it's also known as a veneer scraper as well as just a scraper plane. It's just more functional with different option blades that came with it. Now, if you're looking at brand new ones of these, I believe both the Luban and Nielsen ones come with those, so that's an option if you're looking for that. But you could also get toothing planes for hand planes, so it's not an exclusive to just a scraper plane, but that's why this one is called a scraper plane or a veneer plane. The techniques that you learn here with the number 12.5 scraper plane, from what I've seen, even brand new ones from Nielsen and Luban, the setup and operation is almost identical, although the design is more in a hand plane shape. So before we jump in and sharpen it, and if you've seen my video on the cabinet scraper, you'll know the very first thing you have to do with one of these is ensure this sole is flat. In this case, I will refer you back to the other video to show you how I did that, because it's a very simple process. Whether it's timber on the bottom here or metal, the process is the same. You're just going to rub it back and forth on sandpaper, or you could use a properly set up hand plane if you wanted to with this, but the sandpaper is the best method. And I've already gone ahead and flattened this one off camera because I've obviously been using it, and I used it when I flattened at the top of my table here, my bench. With these scrapers, this one is only about 1.5 mil thick. You can get them up to about 2 mil thick, and so there were varied thicknesses of scraper plates for these scraper planes. And this one being 1.5 mil, it does vibrate a little bit, so if you do want to remove that ever so slight vibration, the thicker blades is the way to go. And I know those options come with the Nielsen and the Luban planes, so yeah, I would recommend the thicker blade if you do go for that. What I have here is a 400, 600 and 1200 grit diamond stones, and I would only use the more aggressive stones here for the initial setting up of flattening the back of this. If you look at this here, you can see how it's already shiny here, and I've already prepared this, and so I'm going to go through not the initial preparation but just the sharpening that you do every time. So in that end, I'm going to move these two out to the side for the moment and go to my finest stone. I'm going to come in and just run back and forwards a little bit like this, and that's removing any old burr that we had on there. So now we've got this nice smooth surface here. Once we've polished that back, we have to work on the bevel. And once again, if you remember a few weeks back, I did a video on how to freehand sharpen a plane blade. The reason I wanted you to know those techniques is so we can sharpen scrapers like this that go on scraper planes, and also the cabinet scrapers, so we can actually freehand it, because there's no jig that's going to hold these properly to do it. So we need to learn how to lock our elbows in, lock our wrists, hold and find the bevel, and then sharpen it, because you want one consistent bevel on these scraper planes and cabinet scrapers. So let's get to it. So for this, because I've already prepared the bevel once before, I'm using my 600 grit diamond stone. So I'm coming in here, running it back and forwards, And I'm just feeling for that burr on the back. So now I can feel a burr all the way along. I'm going to move on to my fine stone. So now I've got a nice polished bevel along here. Now what we will have done there, and we've formed a little tiny burr along the back. Now because of in the next stage where we use the burnisher, we don't actually have to remove that, the burnisher will deal with that for us. So what is a burnisher? Well, a burnisher is metal that is harder than the metal of the scraper that you're using, and it allows you to manipulate the metal and roll over a little tiny hook. And so that burr that you form looks like this up here, which is the same as with the cabinet scraper. So if you've watched the cabinet scraper video, you may want to just skip ahead because this process is going to be the same as that one. So if you've already seen that, you don't need to see that. I've left timestamps so you can just jump ahead. So what I'm going to do is put the scraper over by the edge of my bench, choke up on my burnisher so I can use it here. And what we're doing is the bevel side is down, so we've got the flat side here. And we're going to go back and forwards about 30 times like this. Now, that's probably enough. Now, if you feel that after this process, you'll feel that that burr has completely disappeared after you've moved back and forwards across it, so there was no need to remove it. And what this has done is kind of push the steel back into itself, and it kind of just strengthens the steel, or so I'm told. And I've used this process since I saw someone mention it. I think it might have been Paul Sellers, and it's worked perfectly for me every time, so there's no need to change that. I've been working with that, and I'm not going to change it because it works. Now what I want to do is throw this into our vise just so we can get in there, choke up on it, and we're going to work on the bevel to turn that burr. So in order to stop my cabinet scraper moving, what I'm going to do, because I'm sitting it up higher, is clamp a piece of wood that's roughly the same width as it in behind it here. And when I clamp that in there, you can see that as I run this way, it's not going to move as much and flex, so it's a little more stable. So in order to do this, you match it back and forth 3 or 4 times there. Again, it's pushing steel back into it and supposedly strengthening the steel. And now we want to turn a burr to this flat side. So as we do it, we just slowly drop it a few times. And now I can feel a nice consistent burr all the way along here. So we've got our burr done. Now, it's very difficult for me to show you that burr, but when I rub my finger here, I can feel it, but I can't really show that to you. It's almost impossible. You'll have to get it under a microscope to actually see it, but know that you can actually feel it because your touch is way more sensitive than your eyesight here, and so you'll know when you've got it, when it's there. So, now that we've got our burr turned, let's put it into our scraper plane. I'll show you how to adjust it to take the perfect shaving. To protect that burr, you want to bring it in from the bottom, and you might need to just rock this back and forwards here, this little piece. Get it there, lie it down, lock that up nice and tight on it because that's going to stop your scraper moving. Now, you can hear that that's making contact and it's squealing, and that's the actual scraper blade squealing. So you can already tell that we're actually very aggressive here based on that, and we're getting this very, very thick shaving. Now it's fairly intuitive here when we do this. If we loosen this one and do the one up on the right, it's going to make it more aggressive, and we can actually tilt this back past 90 degrees so it's tilting forwards, and we don't ever want to do that. And then if we loosen this back one and do up this front one here, it's going to move it the other direction. And so when we move it to the right, back towards the handles, we're making it more aggressive essentially. When we're moving it to the left, towards the front of the plane, we're making it less aggressive. And essentially the reason why that is, it's acting almost like the knob on the depth adjuster on a hand plane. Up more is making the blade protrude more. Moving it forward is actually lifting it. So you can imagine if we're rock like that and we lift it forwards, it's lifting this edge. So if we're starting here, you can see that it's actually lifting it out. and so that's why it makes it more aggressive or less aggressive. We can hear that's trying to squeal, and it's trying to take a very heavy shaving. It's trying to dig in quite deep, and right now this is protruding, I don't know, maybe a millimetre, which is quite a bit from the sole. So what we want to do is obviously move it the other way. So we loosen this one on the right, and we're going to go forward just a bit to start with here. So we've maybe gone a third forward from what we were. And we're starting to hear that we're taking a shaving and it's not squealing, and you can see they're starting to get finer. They're not as thick as those ones right at the start, and it almost wasn't taking a shaving because it was squealing too much. So if we decide to take this forward a little bit further, yet again we're taking an even finer shaving. And if we go forward a little bit more to roughly what I'm eyeballing, about 60 degrees here, it's even finer again, and in this case we can actually go forward even more and get it even finer. And so if we look at these shavings, there's actually not much between all of them. If we put them all together you wouldn't even really notice, but they are slightly finer, and where you really notice it is when you're pushing it through the timber, and also how smooth the surface of your timber feels. Now, I didn't mention this to you, but you can actually run things without turning a burr at all. So what I did off camera was sharpen the other side of this up, which was what I did when I first got it and prepared it. So we've actually got bevel on this side, just like a hand plane, flat back, flat bevel. In some cases you might want to roll the corners slightly on these, because they can dig in if you're using it on a big wide open flat surface. Because there's no curving to the plate, these corners can dig in, and so if you have that problem, just give it that quick roll treatment. Just want to show you how the angles differ with the side that doesn't have the burr. And so at the moment I've got the non-burr side down, and we're on that forward angle, and I'm not even taking a shaving, it's just a bit of powder. So what we need to do is actually make this sit up way more aggressive. And so in this much more upright position, we're starting to take a shaving, and if we look in here, these shavings are fairly similar to what you get with the burr. They're not as consistent, but they are still finer, and so they do make a very good fine skim pass. We could actually go even a little bit more aggressive here, and you can see now we're getting very close to that upright 90 degrees. And even then, we're still taking quite a fine shaving right here. What I thought I'd do is, I'll show you a piece of radiata pine, both with and without the burr, and then we'll go to a piece of jarrah, which is a nice hardwood, and show you both with and without the burr. Although you've already seen that, I just wanted to do the comparison, just so you can have a direct comparison. So I've put the side with the burr back down, and so on this hardwood, we can see that we got fairly fine shavings, and the surface is fairly smooth here. So now what I want to do is I'll switch over, and we'll put the pine in here, and I shouldn't have to change the angle. We can already hear that on the softwood it's taking a little bit more of an aggressive shaving, so I can actually tip it forward a little bit and make it less aggressive. And we can actually go a little bit further forward again. So that's a fairly fine shaving here, and this has actually left the surface fairly smooth. It's ever so slight roughness to it, which you could smooth out with a bit of sandpaper, but I'm not so sure that you get it much smoother than that. So as we can see there, the burr does a pretty good job on both hardwoods and softwoods. And so we're going for quite extremes here. Jarrah's very high up on the silica, high end, fairly curly, all that sort of thing, so it works well there. Radiata pine is right on the softest end. This is store-bought radiata, and it tends to be very soft. This has been in the shop a little bit, so it has acclimatized, and it's probably not got as much moisture as when you buy it from the shop, but that's what we're dealing with here. So since we already had the pine in here, I've now turned it over, so now we've got no burr. Our burr is actually up here. And as we know, we have to go more aggressive or more upright without this to get a shaving, but in its current state, where it's taking these very, very fine, almost powdery shavings, that's leaving that glassy smooth, almost glistening on this pine, which is interesting to know if you want to actually scrape pine, that you can actually get that very glassy finish. It's not rough at all. So what we're going to do is just do that adjustment that we did before. We're just going to make it a little bit more aggressive. And once again, it's very smooth to the touch, and we're taking larger shaving. You can get it even smoother than you can with the burr on there. So if you're doing a lot of pine, it might be worthwhile having one side set up with that and one side with the curl, so you can start with the curl and then move into that other side to take that sort of buttery smooth finish and actually leave it almost glistening. I'm not sure if you could actually see it there, but I could see that it was almost glass smooth there at one point. So that's not something you could get with other scrapers, and so that's actually a very interesting comparison to see. You wouldn't even need to sand this, it's that smooth in my opinion. And we can see we already got that, so we're actually getting almost just as smooth a surface as we were on the pine here on the hardwood, which is what you would expect. I think it's not quite as clean without the burr on the hardwood here, because I am finding that it's leaving a few little scraggly lines, and that might be in my sharpening, but it was very polished out, and so I think it's just the nature of dragging a sharp edge across the surface. There might be a little tiny burr from when I sharpened there, even though I tried to remove it, and that could be leaving those lines. But you can see that it still does give you a pretty smooth finish there, and I think ultimately with the burr, that's better for the hardwoods. And for the softwoods, I actually think no burr works slightly better. It gives you just that slightly smoother finish, especially if you run through with your burr first and then follow it up with a very, 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 very fine set no burr, and it kind of just almost sands the surface. It just takes that slight roughness off, if there was any there, which I didn't get with the burr side in this case. So there you have it, folks. That's the scraper plane, and I believe that it's a very versatile piece of kit, and as you can see, you need to adjust it based on the burr that you happen to form on your particular scraper at the time, and also the timber you're on. Allowing you to make it more aggressive or less aggressive in the cut is beneficial, especially where you might be cutting a little too deep, so you can just adjust it. There's no need to actually remove the scraper and set it. It always sits square in these, and once you've got it set, you can just adjust it through that range and change how aggressive or less aggressive you want that shaving to be, and I think that is a big plus when it comes to scraping. The other thing you have here is a sole that references more flat than you would with even a cabinet scraper or a card scraper, and so you're less likely to divot the surface, which is possible with those. It's unlikely because you're taking such a fine shaving, but it does still allow you to spot work around the place, albeit it's skipping the surface and taking a few more high spots, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Especially if you're using a scraper to do an entire panel or an entire workbench like I did with mine. The scraper plane, to get that perfect angle, is just beneficial for that, and running the entire surface with one of these, because there's more heft to it, it's got a larger sole, it's easier just to control it the entire way through, and you're not changing your angle and everything, so you get a consistent burr. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below. While you're down there, sound off in the comments. Have you used a scraper plane? Are you thinking about using a scraper plane? Well, did I answer your questions here? Please let me know. If you've got any more questions, please leave them down below and I'll endeavour to answer every single one of them. So if you want to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Instagram and also on Patreon. And if you'd like to see another scraper video such as this, please check out the one here on the introduction to all the scrapers, the card scraper video, and also the setup of the cabinet scraper. Bye for now.